I don't know why I chose to do this. It's been on my mind since I picked the next game I'm going to cover. It's one that I've enjoyed in some of these circumstances, and it just brought my mind to it. The topic is sort of my history with the women I've been involved with in long-term relationships in gaming. And maybe one short-term relationship, although it was unconnected. We'll see. But it's been my tendency to get women I'm involved in into gaming if they're not already somewhat into it. And, because it's something that I'm going to be spending a lot of time on, and it's something that I can enjoy with another person in that kind of circumstance. Plus, to me, the idea of playing a two-player game with someone that I don't really know well is not pleasing. I don't want to sit across from somebody that I don't like, or that I'm not sure that I'm going to like, and play a two-player game very often. So I tend to avoid that, but sometimes I get into gaming with folks playing multiplayer stuff, and I'm willing to do a two-player thing with them. But most of my two-player gaming has actually probably been with, women I've been in relationships with. I put up a Geeks List on BGG because my past wife and I, to sort of track the games as our relationship and our gaming existence sort of progressed. And that's sort of a particularly sad story in a number of ways, but starting with my first girlfriend, I was fairly old. Yeah, like I was at 20 years old when I first got a girlfriend, and because I was a gamer geek, right? And there had been opportunities previously, but I was too dense to really see or take advantage of them. Not sure I'm any less dense now in such ways. But yeah. And we met through a friend. It was kind of a weird situation. The first time she saw me, she had been warned in advance that I was very weird. And it was a Halloween party. I came out dressed as, like a fairy prince or an elven prince or something like that, in a robe, and she took the first impression was that I was gay as hell. We ended up talking sometime later over a Christmas break, and I guess sort of started bonding more at that point. And then, for the first, I don't know, probably 7 months or so of our relationship, I don't think we really gamed at all. There was this new thing in my life, this whole, I'm in a relationship with someone, and it's, everything was kind of focused on that from that point of view. I was still gaming, it just wasn't something that she was included in particularly, and I didn't really think to try to recruit her at that point. Once we moved in together, which was, I guess, sort of after that, sort of, after that 7 months or so. I mean, we were spending every damn night together almost and stuff like that, and many of our days. So there was it had almost moved to that ratio or that situation already. But once we actually moved in and got a place together, I started having friends over to game, and that became a different kind of situation. It wasn't oh, this is his gaming night, or a gaming night. It's a good time for me to take care of stuff that I need to take care of at my house or outside of this relationship or whatever. So, I guess kind of, opened an invitation just because gaming was happening. She was there and whatever. And she took a little bit of it, stayed away from some of the heavier stuff, but got into the role playing a lot. And we ended up doing a fair amount of role playing and then gaming afterwards. And actually, quite often, the gaming afterwards she would go to bed for or whatever, rather than stick around for. So, and then after 1 year together, living together, she had graduated and was supposed to go back to grad school somewhere else, and things were all complicated and everything. And we tried a long distance relationship without any gaming, really. I visited her at one point for a week or so and brought a couple games with me, but they were mainly for me to amuse myself when we weren't doing stuff. And then things went, downhill pretty hard during that next year, while I was in school and she was away, and we just ended up being broken up. So that relationship lasted, I don't know, call it a year and a half, 2 years, I don't know what. Well, more than 2 years, but whatever. And it took about a year for me to sort of find somebody else who was my psycho ex, who was already a gamer, but a role-playing gamer for the most part. She was always kind of interested in doing the heavier stuff because, so role-playing can be very, very detailed and heavy. Unfortunately, she was mainly used to D&D, so not so much at that point, although D&D has changed apparently. But one of the big things is, in almost any role-playing game, you have people who can help you deal with the system aspects. And then you just get used to your character and how it operates within the system and how to do the things you need to do and whatnot. So you don't end up, in most systems, really delving deep into the system as a player unless you want to do that, unless, you want to try to min-max or really, play around with some of the fuzzier areas of a system. And by the way, with my first girlfriend, we were playing mainly Rollmaster at that point. And, she caught on to it better than, with no gaming experience, better than one of my other friends who was a D&D player coming over to it. So, there's expectations, etc., in how you approach and things like that. But never really did much in terms of non-roleplay gaming with her. She was not too good on sort of analytical thought, logic, things like that, and didn't catch on to new systems very well. We tried some things like Magic Realm and stuff like that, but which is quite a hefty, burden, but it appeals in the type of game. but I largely just kind of shushed her away for any of the other stuff. Um, it was also the fact that at least one of my friends really despised her, so that worked out okay. And it's kind of hard to describe what we were in. We were officially dating for one night and fucking a lot and hanging out together all the time and stuff. At other times without being together, whatever that means. Uh, she was officially with other people and stuff. Me, largely not. Um, uh, but when she was in the hospital at one point, I ended up meeting my first wife. And again, we kind of started off, as I guess is often the case, with more kind of normal, being in love type stuff, right? Going out having sex in weird places, going for walks, just hanging out together and such on. And in fact, for most of the time that we were together, for the first year, I'd say, or whatever it was, when we were in one place, there wasn't a hell of a lot of gaming going on in my life, and almost all of it was outside of my house. So again, it became a good time for me to go out gaming and her to do other things. Or the other thing, I did actually do solo in all of these relationships, right? I did a fair amount of solo gaming, but there I was in a very, very restrained space. I had a decent sized bedroom where the two of us could kind of be, but the rest of the house, it was a multi-tenant house. Everybody in it was gamers, but there really wasn't any space where I could set up a game on a table or anything like that. So I would set up like an 18xx game. Well, I would set up 1830 or something, relatively small on my bedroom floor and just play it through, boom, boom, And it tended to be smaller, lighter games, so you might see me do Britannia or whatever. Once we moved to our own place, which happened due to the deterioration of our neighborhood, yeah, they kind of, I lived in an area that had been student slums, and rent was relatively cheap in that area, but it was also almost entirely students. And then slowly there became more and more attrition in Buffalo. What happened was more and more of the campus, especially the younger people, were moving to the larger, newer campus. And also the prices started going up in the neighborhood, and that sort of drove the students out and started moving people who were, maybe 5 or 6 blocks away in a much, much worse neighborhood, but where the prices were higher than in the student slums. And it was like this became attractive to much more obnoxious, much more dangerous culture. People who had been to prison and whatnot. Anyway, after somebody stole her bike, she stole it back, and they basically slammed a tree branch against her head while somebody else did. And that was one place where my sword came in handy. But we moved into our own place, and it was kind of weird. We had the top couple floors, top floor and a half or something, of a house where the woman who owned it wasn't living, didn't have, didn't appear to have any intention of using it for anything, which seemed kind of strange to me. But also, I think, just didn't want to move her stuff out of it. And so, she just like rented us these upper floors, but we were alone in the building, which was very, very cool. And eventually got access to be able to do laundry there. Um, it was not a huge place. There wasn't. It had a reasonable amount of floor space, but some of it was kind of funky. So like I would have to play on the floor because there's a slanting roof or something like that. The kitchen was the main area where we could game, but that was also kind of the main area where other stuff would happen too. So if I had something really big, I had to play it in weird places, and if I had something smaller, I could play it for a couple of days in the kitchen or whatever. I had a friend who lived across the street, which is how I found the place. I was first looking at moving into their attic, who had more space in his attic for gaming and whatnot. But also, we continued doing role playing and stuff like that, and played, I guess, some board games. And I know that, my wife and I, we weren't married yet at that point, I think. Pretty sure. I don't really remember when that happened. It was such a non-event. That, we would play some things. I can remember playing things like Crayon Rails there. And some of the stuff that she really liked. Talisman. Oh, we had played Talisman all along. And Crayon Rails. Just some lighter stuff that she was attracted to. We moved to the next place after our landlord died or something, sold. The new landlord was renovating the house for himself and very quickly found asbestos. And his initial had been, well, I don't know how long you guys can stay because I'm probably going to take, your kitchen away and use that as part of my place, but it'll be at least a year or so. Anyway, it was like, yeah, you got about a month to get out. But he was a realtor and was involved in a management group that owned some apartment buildings. He immediately set us up with, okay, look, this place has been really trashed. I've tried renting it out a couple of times, and, people wouldn't take it. If you're willing to do this and fix it up, he gave us the same rent, which was a pretty good deal. And it was a much larger place. It was kind of more downtown, in an iffy area. I would hear shotgun blasts go off every now and then. But it was on a nicer street. It was just like a block, though, away from the main street, which meant if you crossed Main Street to the other side, it was just like a war zone over there. Burned out buildings and all kind of shit like that. Very, very strange. What was, the nature of Buffalo at that point. And while we were there, I started introducing her into more and more larger, more military games. She still preferred, I think, in general, playing some of the stuff that was, the things that we had liked, that she had liked, Talisman or Crayon Rails, that were kind of like, low cost to learn. Once it was known, it was really low cost because we knew it well enough. We could just break it out and play it, whatever. And this was before at the earlier, all the way back, very close to when we first met. We first came into contact with Magic, and we're both addicted with that, the game, not. A couple of friends brought it back from the year that it had showed up at Gen Con, and it was just the rage everywhere. Everybody was playing for Ante initially. But she and I continued to play for Ante just with each other for the most part, although my friend across the street did with us as well. And I continued to keep buying it. So that kind of fit into our, okay, here's something we can do that's a deal, right? So there was the Talisman stuff, which the only reason I bought was that, like, I got it several expansions and all the minis for in the expansions for like under $5, and had to collect bottles to get it. We were broke as hell at that point. The Crayon Rails, I had a couple of them from earlier, and well, I had one of them from earlier. We ended up buying Iron Dragon. There was a game store near us, which she really really liked, but she liked Empire Builder too, and we played with my friend who, another friend, and a couple of other people. So we would get together and play in that sense, and again, we would also end up getting getting role playing going over there. It was an iffier situation for role playing there. At first, I my role playing with her started actually with Vampire, and I had her, my Psycho X's boyfriend briefly, maybe another person or two in there, but it was mainly just the three of us. It was an interesting period of life. That would be regular players. But then after I moved to that first place, 2 floors, where one floor was the kitchen, we used to play potato and stuff like that. There was that's where really my heavy role playing with her took place. We had a regular night every Tuesday night or something. I would actually take off work an hour early so that I could kind of prepare for the game better, because I was working until like 5 p.m. or something like that, and we started at like 7, so I really wanted to get a little bit more time in to prep that. Very, very heavy on the real role-playing aspects, probably the heaviest that I've ever gotten on that in a game. And that was a lot of fun, and she was really, really into it. Once that campaign ended, we tried a couple of other things that other people ran, and then so then we moved to the new place, the bigger place, much nicer. I had a gaming room there, and we had a huge living room, and a huge kitchen, huge bathroom with hexagons, tiles. Her role playing willingness fell off during that, but also she started going to school, and so in terms of my gaming nights, when we started having guys over for gaming more regularly, in general she sort of backed away from that. I think she was less into a couple of my friends, at least one of my friends, and kind of didn't want to game with him, and kind of didn't want to game in a big group anymore. But one thing we did start doing there was this walkthrough of history, which I talked about in a couple of places. This was basically, let's start with the earliest game I have and work our way through it. And we actually got through and played at least a little of every historical game I had, including the magazine games and whatnot. Now that was a much smaller quantity than it is now. My game collection was probably a little under half of what it is now, somewhere between 500 and 600 games. But we didn't play every single game that was science fiction or fantasy that I had. And I tried to push for that, and she was kind of fatigued by that. But there were, I learned all kind of odd things about her tastes in that. So for example, she really liked Terrible Swift Sword and wanted to do that again when we had time. It was a weird situation where it was like, well, we played it for a couple of weeks, and then I think I had to leave town or something for a couple of weeks, so we cleaned it up. Maybe something else was going on. But anyway, it was a situation where we wanted to get it cleaned up, but there was this, it would be really cool if we could do this full through at some point. And I was shocked by that. There were other things that I was kind of surprised by, some that I was surprised she didn't like, some that I was surprised she liked. But that was kind of a cool facet. One of the things that brought this to mind was that somebody remarked, I don't remember which game it was, I played something probably with my recently passed wife. They were like, "Wow, you're a lucky man to have gotten somebody to play, a wife who would play this with you." I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that's really the case. I mean, it's sort of like that. It's almost a requirement, right? um, so when I first got in contact with my recently passed wife, um, one of the things that I put out there as a all right, here are some kind of requirements I have to have. You have to be willing, to be in a triad. You have to be willing to play games, play my games with me. Maybe not all of them, but a fair quantity of them. You have to be open to these things. Um, and she was to all of them. And, early on, we started out playing a fair amount of games. And she was always more into the fantasy type stuff, which I kind of understand. But again, kind of an odd sprinkling, like we played Musket and Pike, English Civil War. She really got a kick out of that. Didn't get such a kick out of most of the operational stuff, which again, I understand fully. Most of the big strategic games weren't really two-player anyway, so we'd stay away from a lot of them. But it was kind of weird because we started off with I have this sort of slope of how to introduce people into war games, and it's kind of like start with some early SPI stuff and then work up from there. And the early SPI stuff was fine. The working up from there was fine. And then there was just sort of this, I don't really want to do, not wanting to do the historical stuff as much anymore. Got really into, not Magic, could never really hook her on that, but Dominion. And that became kind of the go-to play, the easy thing to do. Before that, before I found Dominion, it had been things, again, like Talisman was fine and Crayon Rails were fine for kind of the same reasons. But, and there were other things that we kind of enjoyed. Played Mansions of Madness, which is hard to do two-player. It's kind of fucked up that way. I don't know, a couple of other things that really kind of attracted her. And I started buying games that were more along her lines. She tended not to be all that hot on Euros, but tended to beat me in them, which says something. But yeah, at some point or another, it started drifting off, and it became, not wanting to play games for the most part with me anymore, not wanting to, and that dropped down to, okay, I'll play Dominion, type of thing, so we could do something together, but not wanting to learn new games regularly or anything along those lines. And then gaming just sort of tapered away, especially after we made, well, even before we made the move here, but after we made the move here, it really tapered away, which was okay in some ways, because the first year I was here, I did a lot of gaming at the store, but still, this is, one of the ways that I interact, one of the few ways that I'm comfortable interacting and spending time with people. And one of the others is going for walks with them, and walks also kind of dipped off. Got kind of a jump up when there was noise in Phoenix, and then when we moved here to explore the city and whatnot, and there was noise at that apartment. But once we got to this house, after kind of understanding the area directly around us, walks became more and more of a, nah, I don't want to do that. And of course, with her social anxiety, which is why the walks didn't happen as much, along with a general lethargy that I understand fully, there was no chance of getting her into gaming with other people, which really kind of sucked. And, honestly, by the time she killed herself, we were barely doing anything together. Like, I can remember playing a couple years before that. I can remember playing a game during the big winter where we were locked in, and it was freezing cold and there was nothing that could be done. But mainly, our only interaction at that point was every now and then a walk, going shopping together every 2 weeks, hanging out in the kitchen when she was upstairs, which would be briefly to make food or do some cleaning or whatever, and then sitting and eating dinner together, in front of the TV, whatever TV we were watching. Which is really kind of a shame. I mean, that's not really what I miss, none of that. What I really miss is running downstairs and having somebody I can tell something to. But, or whenever I would come home. But yeah, I mean, our relationship had really decreased to a point where there was almost nothing, and gaming was one of the things that went out the window. And honestly, the same was true with my first wife. After we had moved to that one place, just gaming slowly dropped off, with her going to grad school and working further away and whatnot. It was harder and harder to find time. And I, if I'm not fueled with that kind of side of things, if none of my needs are being met, I also sort of disassociate more and more. So, I mean, it really is an important part of my life. And something, right away you've got this, yeah, all right, so you've got the personality you do, the tastes that you do, all of which are already very limiting, and then throw onto that, yeah, and you gotta be willing to game. And game serious stuff, I mean, I don't want to just fuck around and play a few Euros or something. So yeah, I don't know. That's not to say that things can't degenerate to what they were, but once they do that, everything sort of drifts away. It's kind of weird. Anyway, I thought I would babble along these lines just because the next game is something that I found easy to bring various women into. It's a 2-player game and fairly light, but still very interesting in a lot of ways.